In this video, I wanted to briefly expound on a statement that I made in my most recent video. At times when my pain is more manageable, I begin to take the absence of pain for granted, and the strong feelings of frustration and tension that come with pain is eventually replaced by other forms of frustration and desire. So when you're in a good amount of pain every day, one of your main self-motivated desires will naturally be to want to alleviate the pain. And when I was in physical chronic pain every day, my primary sources of relief from the pain was found in rehabilitation exercises, going on frequent walks, and frequent meditation. These things brought me great feelings of relief. The physical movements brought me temporary relief from the physical pain itself, of course, and the meditation helped me to cope with the mental frustration that accompanied the physical pain. I mentioned how I put in lots of time and effort into doing these frequent activities, which is true, but it's also true that these very basic activities were oftentimes the highlights of most of my days, due to the pleasurable relief that they brought me. And if these things wouldn't have brought me the relief that I desperately craved, there's no doubt in my mind that I would have turned to far less healthy methods of temporary alleviation, methods that very likely would have resulted in some forms of addiction. After finally discovering the best movements for my particular case of scoliosis, my pain levels throughout the day eventually began to greatly improve, and I was immensely grateful. But after a while, new desires and addictions eventually began to manifest due to the way our primate brains are wired. Due to the pain being almost entirely gone, the frequent walks and rehabilitation exercises no longer brought me those same satisfying feelings of relief, and this gave way to excess desires. And meditation, exercise, fasting, and other forms of self-discipline have greatly helped me in continuing to lessen these excess addictions and desires, as well as controlling the impulses to act upon them. The boredom side of the dreaded oscillation between pain and boredom, as Schopenhauer put it, inevitably causes us to take the absence of pain for granted, and we end up forgetting how gigantic of a privilege more minor temporary states of deprivation are when they are directly compared to the much more severe, inescapable forms of suffering that excess addiction oftentimes leads to. The claim that many philosophers have made that happiness is no more than the alleviation of suffering and deprivation is something that I strongly agree with. You never appreciate a good meal more than when your appetite is at its peak. Getting home and taking off my shoes after a long day can sometimes be borderline orgasmic. And your gratitude for your physical health will never be greater than it is upon finally recovering from an agonizing illness. When we indulge in forms of transient pleasure, whether it's compulsively checking notifications on your phone or having mind-blowingly amazing sex, we're essentially just scratching itches. When speaking of pleasurable states, the value does not lie in the method of relief. It lies in the relief from the pain or deprivation in and of itself. This is one of the main reasons why domesticated animals are so happy and content when properly cared for. Much of it is owed to their ignorance, of course. They don't have any future anxieties to fret over or vivid memories of the past to obsessively dwell on. But the other primary reason is that their itches are incredibly easy to scratch. Their desires are incredibly easy to satisfy. And this is also a big reason why us human beings, even the most privileged of us, are oftentimes so dissatisfied, oftentimes downright miserable. It's far too easy for our addictions to become completely unmanageable, for our desires to become completely insatiable. Life eats away at us over the years, both physically and mentally, and we find ourselves covered in these terribly itchy, open wounds. We vigorously scratch and scratch while the itch only continues to grow stronger. The wounds continue to add up, and the already existing wounds are never allowed to heal. The trick is to find the most healthy, constructive methods of relieving the itchiness, the various levels of tension, frustration, and desire that we all feel to widely varying degrees, and to minimize addiction so to minimize the itch. But of course, this is far easier said than done, depending on an individual's given afflictions and addictions and the severity of them. I realize that being able to utilize constructive methods of relief is a gigantic privilege. Some people don't even have the option of momentarily relieving their pain through self-destructive methods. Some forms of severe suffering are beyond even very brief moments of alleviation. And for others, relentlessly gnawing at their itchy open wounds is the only form of self-soothing consolation that they have left. And as horrific as this truth is, to deny it would be delusional. But I do believe that the majority of people who act as though this is their only remaining option are making a very serious mistake. The majority of people who possess the privilege of being able to utilize constructive coping methods don't act as though they do. Many people who still have much of their physical and mental health intact will still end up getting heavily caught up in excess addictions, and this frequently results in a much lower quality of life for themselves as well as those closest to them. Their children, for example. And then this goes on to infect their children's children, and then their children. Over time, the price that many people will end up paying for their stubborn addictions are often far beyond, far more severe than what they could have ever anticipated them to be. Far beyond what they had ever thought possible. Anyways, to those of you who are watching this, I hope that you were able to cope with existence and relieve your ceaseless deprivations in the best ways that you can.